preparations for this conference, I browsed through talks of other speakers, and I think in section A they're having a talk which is similar to mine. They talk about analysts growing to become digital transformers, going from local to global, whereby I would be talking about enterprise architecture. So they're talking about where it's going. I will be talking about which tools you can use and where you can obtain information. I'm not going to cover all corporate architecture, which is impossible, but I'll try to give you the highlights and key points. I'm Mikhail Maksimov, product owner and business analyst, mostly leaning toward product owner now. I worked under a number of consulting projects, and I have a TOGAF certification. This is one of the methodologies, consistent and coherent. I have my own YouTube channel called Digit Letter, which is devoted to business and system analysis. But I think sometime later I'll get my hands on enterprise architecture. I'm trying to speak fast, otherwise we will fall asleep. Let's not distinguish too much between business and enterprise analysis. What is corporate infrastructure? Why do analysts need it? So why do analysts need it? I think there is a couple of important reasons for it. In my view, the broader the scope, the more effective we'll be at solving problems. What analysis is meant to do is to work out best solutions. If we stay in silos, we will not be able to have an overall view of our company, and we will not be able to identify real needs. So it gives you a comprehensive insight. It emanates from practice that analysts are people who are asked to deliver more and more. Some say analysts are no longer required, but others think otherwise, and I believe the next logical step is looking toward a business architecture, IT architecture. One other observation which drove me to speak today on this topic is it appears that corporate architecture principles permeate companies more increasingly, and they begin to put it to practice. Some 5 years ago, as I got to know corporate architecture, we went around saying business architecture 101, but now people got the hang of it and they're reaching their second level tasks. So the first message, first substantive message, I think it's no secret that products do not come from the sky. Companies pursue strategic goals. Strategies may be formalized or not. Look for yourself. Are you aware how your actions contribute to the strategic goals of your company? So, corporate architecture has several scenarios, but one of the key ones is to provide granularity to the idea that any action locally will seek to contribute to a global objective. Any development project is understood as expenditures which need to be reimbursed somehow at a later stage. Committing money and budget entails costs for business, and they need to be justified. And all of these changes should bring us closer to the declared goals. For now, I'm sticking to declarations, but they're required to get my message later. So don't perceive business requirements as ultimate truth. If you are a business analyst, or maybe an analyst working with businesses, if you decided that you figured out ultimate requirements, check them against the reality, or check them against a company's vision. If you do not have a formalized description or mission statement of your company, it becomes harder to discuss business requirements. And it may lead to some unpleasant developments when there is this confusion. And one example of that is import replacement, which is very topical right now, or artificial intelligence to be integrated into processes. So bosses tell you we need to have and apply AI, but it's not the right succession of actions. Such approaches are a bit upsetting. Do you have such stories to share as well? Really? So few hands? Yeah, I know it. It's a hard confession to make. Did you troubleshoot it somehow? How did you address it? What do you mean exactly? What do you use? What tools do you use to fight that? It's a good idea to use visualization and modeling. Yeah, go ahead. Which AI in particular they have in mind? Yeah, that's a great question. You're lucky. It doesn't work like that in my company. The idea is different. You need to have an extension for or toward business metrics. I'll share with you later how to do it. It's like your CGM instrument that will lay down a map, sort of map for your business to try to figure out what they are after. Before we move on, I think that this is a thorny and dangerous way working with business requirements, meaning that you will have to go deep into the subject matter. So if you're not familiar with the subject, you will strike your customers as amateurs, which you should avoid by all means. You will require some authority, gravitas, and power. Other side effects include situation where this approach causes changes in our habitual decisions, something that we're used to. It's like in an investigation. It's important not to find the clues that lead to you. To handle business requirements, we require a toolset that will be able to coherently explain why business requirements the way they are. There is a guide called Business Capability Analysis, which is described, but not to the level which I find desirable. It's a debatable point, and we could have it discussed in the lobby, but I hear a segue here toward enterprise architecture. Business capabilities describe the ability of an enterprise to act on or transform something that helps attain a business goal or objective. In TOGAF, all processes, service, IT systems are built on TOGAF. So, by crossing this bridge, we get into enterprise architecture realm. I'm speaking based on my own experience, of course. It's a window to a new world. Some things seem to be similar, others are quite new and exciting. For business, this is a response to growing complexity and system management. The more complex a company gets, the more intricate corporate connections are, the harder it is to handle all the data. Because everything is data-driven, there is alienation of knowledge, competencies, and it has to be sorted out. Money is the main thing for a commercial company.
For a non-for-profit company, it's a bit more complicated, but you can find some replacement for money. But let's talk about commercial. So, thanks to this, they don't overdo architecture, because this is not just about drawing beautiful pictures and that's it. We'll talk about capabilities map. One of the key problems that I ran into myself is trying to describe it in an ideal way. Like you come to decision makers and you're trying to describe what the company can do, and they would tell you everything they need, so it would look ideal. But that ideal is controversial. Does not reflect the reality. And so, in the end, all those architecture stories should be based in metrics. Those architecture supervision committees are embedded in the management system, and this is exactly where you need to come up with feasibility study. Unless there is no money, no advantage for company, then this was going to be quite an abstract conversation. Another point, Edward Durning used to say 5% efficiency depends on staff, 95% efficiency depends on the system. This is a beautiful picture with the waiter If that's the system, he will never get you the carrot, and he'll never get you the carrot if the system is designed like that. So it should be organized in such a way that you wouldn't have to talk about motivation all the time. If you listen to some conferences in the business architecture, a couple of years ago, they were talking a lot about motivation, and the managers believe if we fine people or if we give bonuses to people, it's going to work. Not necessarily so. Sometimes the processes are built in such a way that they don't help. For the company to work like that in the business architecture, you might want to talk about the subject of management. Those are perhaps mostly some stories about processes, and most build those models, but some believe that processes is not a good thing, and they change all the time, and it makes sense. So in actuality, you can manage with the help of people, you can manage with the help of functionalities, functional wells, and then you decompose everything. You can try use the product lines as an example, but there's an issue about it. The strategic planning is hardly possible with the help of those. You might have a certain processes structure, and tomorrow you have a different structure. So if you distribute budgets based on the processes, tomorrow they're going to change. So because you have to be, so you won't be able to compare the model you have in the end, like with what it used to be. Now the planning horizon is different. Some people say it's only 10 minutes. But when I say stability, I mean that we need an element that we will see in the future. And you can reassemble all the products and then decide how the company looks on the market. Capabilities is one of those elements. It is part of the architecture which is based on TAGAF. So this is like a combination of resources, processes, and people competencies. So you unite everything and you come up with some combination which is good today and maybe good tomorrow. But we need something that is not going to change so fast. This is from Archimate. Who knows Archimate? Many. Archimate is a way to model visualization, corporate architecture. So in the third version, capabilities has a separate layer. That's not even an element of business architecture. It's above everything. So those are business elements, processes, services, and then it is traced down to IT architecture. This is where you have the functionalities, components, and other interfaces which are connected with the system. And basically, then we could talk about capabilities and capabilities map. This is one of the instruments that helps visualize everything. A couple of examples, maybe 3 examples. First is a university example. What we see here is there's a huge piece of work that university has to do, which is planning and methodology, and then the educational process. You can use different process, different sequences, you can use different people, and automation can look different, but globally it will be here tomorrow. If you are to make a more complicated scheme, you can add the ripeness levels, and then, or this is, you'll have the current state and the target state, the more automation in the target state naturally. This is an example from the internet. I like it because it's quite abstract, as abstract as it can get. And you can use it as the baseline, because when you start from scratch, you don't need to start from scratch. This could be used as a reference. This is an aviation company, air company capabilities map. So what are we talking about here? So capabilities map, you can see here, well, development management, like here. There's some specific features here, and it tells you that there's something about air company here. This is quite typical for any big company. Here you have some specific features, but if you want to say that such reference models can be used as baseline, this is true. You just use part of the capabilities. This is important because every company is unique. And there's also leading practice. So this model I gave you here was based on leading practice, which doesn't come free. There are different areas like production, for example, banking sector, and then you have some examples there. And then you simply add some of your specific features. So this is natural if you use some other people's experience. And then some additional details. So those capabilities can be described not only based on capabilities, but you have to understand that you buy some of the capabilities, because some companies outsource and some partners do some things for them. You can use different colors. Something is what we do, something is what others do. Let's talk about ways of working with it. This is about technology, perhaps the least intriguing, but the strategic planning must be done through those capabilities maps, business models, and so on. All those things are, of course, important, but this is once you decide what capabilities you have to work on, and then you first make the as-is, and then you understand which works better for you. So the capabilities is not just a cube or a square. Then you can add some elements, and also you can describe some elements separately, like separate capabilities, like corporate architecture management, a degree of automation, whether you're using specialized ways to maintain this. You're using Word, or you have Ares or Enterprise Architect, whether you have some policies, are they embedded, and how are you using those, and so on. So the deeper you go, the more mature you are, the better it is. An example, like how this can be put into operation. So one, together with OPR, we decide what this model should include. In as is, you should not just include the wishes. You have to identify what you actually have. Then step 2 is heat map, or heat map rather. You add some parameters. For example, we have several maps like that, and it depends on the parameter. For example, you can talk to people in different sections and ask them about the issues they run into, and then try to connect it with certain capabilities. The more problems, the closer to the red. Then the same capabilities, but those are levels of automation. Like you do the audit, and then you see what kind of automation you need. So once you compare those maps, you might have some leaders, or in certain case, you would understand that there's a certain number of squares that need priority attention. So when you start working with the business requirements, you would have this capabilities map, and you would understand the strategic direction, because you know that those capabilities are not good, and then you would deal with these capabilities, work with this, and then you would want that to happen. With the help of the same incremental approach, like you can make a numerical assessment, and then projects will not be hanging in the air, and it will lead to changes in the heat map. And this will change the target state. And how can we work with that? In actuality, analytics doesn't do the trick. Look, you can go up or go down, but the business requirement, that becomes easier when you have visual models, and the capabilities like business architecture, IT architecture, all those are connected. They're connected. So you pick capabilities, and that's what you do next. And then you develop the projects depending on what kind of processes. For example, find out that there are no issues about processes. Or what's wrong then? Like there's too much manual work. We'd like to automate it. So this goes a step higher, and the capabilities become sort of a hostilities map. Then you would understand where the company would go, and this is about analytics not doing the trick. So I'm not telling you that, look, you need to use the capabilities map and forget about everything else. This is quite painstaking work. I wonder how it works with you. I talked to some people during the breakfast.
Corporate architecture. When people say it's server department, I think it's managerial department. If it's server department, there's a problem right there, because servers are there to support, not decision-making bodies. All these architectural and capabilities maps should be integrated into decision-making body. If it's not If that's not done, you can always ask a question, and I would do that. Ideally, this problem can be resolved in a field of analytics, where people develop and talk about new products. Corporate architect is yet another area of growth. And we may have to defend this, and it will be perceived by a lot of people as a job, as an extra job. I think it's worth it. I use it in my work. I use it based on such models. That's all from me. Thank you. Let's have your questions. Questions you prepared, of course. Thank you for your talk, Misha. My question is, at what point this whole thing with enterprise architecture becomes to make sense? Because that's a lot of work, you spend effort, and for a startup it's obviously redundant. So when should you start embracing it? For startups it's not relevant, you're right. I think it has to be large companies, oil companies and corporations. When, you ask? I know an example of Dodo Pizza that we did business with, that we communicated with, and you could ask them. But I think it was an intrinsic to their business plan to have this capability develop. They began with a small section, continually and gradually building it up further. So you can check with them. My name is Misha as well. 2 questions. I have 2 questions. First question is 2-pronged question. I'm just very curious. Who owns this capabilities map? If we decided to own it, is it owned by business or by us? I'll give you some practical examples. The maturity for this happened before we came to those guys. We worked on the outside, externally. A company provided media services, handling content, representing content on TV, on YouTube, and so on. Big staff. So they had very clear business goals. They wanted to digitize and put a price tag on a minute of footage, on a minute of recorded content, considering all other costs. They needed an architecture to understand how this is traced, a cost of a camera with a TV crew, delivered by a TV crew to a location, with business numbers like audience scope, for example. So they had a global business goal, and then they tailored it to the architecture. There was a substratum over this software. So they decided, let's try it. Let's try to calculate ourselves. And they began talking about server description, processes descriptions, but there were very few processes. It was mostly server-based approach. So basically it was a very good pitch. Yeah, it's all about money. Because a priori it's not profitable. It will bleed your margin, profit margin. There are different departments pursuing the same goal. Just look at it. It's duplication. So let's map it out and then drop some of the functions. When does it become to make sense? Let's say we are a startup, beginning to grow, becoming a 500,000 corporation. We were not mature then, but now there are TOGAFs, capabilities map, and becomes overcomplicated. No software from the market helps to automate it, and all attempts are futile because of the sheer size and scope of this thing. I know, you missed the train, yeah? And then you try to catch up post factum. I think it's pretty standard. It's not an easy way, not an easy thing to do. There may be an accrued complexity in unresolved processes. So this is embedded in the basic description of ISIS. You try to get a snapshot of it. You shouldn't start with modeling. Architecture is not pretty models. In one of my presentations on knowledge base, I said that this is the cornerstone of architecture. And it's not only structure and model, it's also a process. In other words, if you do not embed model update into processes, your models will become outdated the minute you drew them. But it's important to be aware of your global goals. It will give you an idea of how much needs to be drawn. Check meta model. You need to compile a meta model. I think it's a pretty handy thing. Andrei Podlesnik, Sibech, 2 questions. In terms of capabilities map, how do you take into account company's life cycle? It appears what you show and see, what you show and say is scalable, and it's great. But it may seem that in a company life cycle, this factory should be intrinsic somehow and embedded in it, not at the heat map level. You make a good point. If I understand it correctly, you mean where does your company stand at the moment? Is it growing? Is it plateauing? And because of that, capabilities map will change. Yes, you noted that you bring consultancy into a company, which is critical. It's a good note, I think. I don't have clear answer to that. And my second question. You make a point that this is not on the service side, and this is a business given. How do you then go on to visualize and building a case? And what do you do if you're faced with a no or a yes? In other words, how can architects measure the effectiveness of their work? In TOGAF, it's a closed circuit. There is a preparatory stage. It's a daisy-shaped figure, and one petal is missing. So TOGAF contains recommendations and approaches to how architects, before running first iteration in a cycle, can launch their work using the same cycle. So architecture relies on its own approaches, and we need to identify what's included in the capabilities map. Thank you very much. So the mechanism is there, but does it work in reality? We don't have a business architect, and this is a real problem. We're looking for a solution, and getting someone from outside is utopia. It's wrong to believe that IT architects will be able to pull this off as well. These are mostly lead developers, and they do not have a good database. These have to be managers. Sooner or later, analysts will grow out to be managers, and somewhere along the way, they will start paying attention to the things I mentioned today. I suggest asking further questions in the lobby. Please award a t-shirt for the best question. Let's have the question about different cycles in a company life. Let me remind you, if you liked a presentation, you can recognize it with your smile, which you